Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karvavahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvisavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us. May He sustain us. May we grow in strength together. May our study together be fruitful. And may we not hate one another. Om peace, peace, peace. Okay, so we had gotten up to verse 12 in chapter 3 of part 2. So first we'll read the verses we covered earlier and then we'll continue on. So this world is like a big banyan tree that is rooted high above in Brahman and has its branches, such as men and women, animals, insects, and plants, spread out below. It, the phenomenal world, is timeless in the sense that it comes and goes again and again, like waves, in other words, in cycles. And the root of this tree is Brahman. It is pure, and they say immortal. All the worlds, including this planet, rest on it. Nothing can surpass it. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. Whatever in this world has come, whatever is in this world has come from prana. In other words, Brahman associated with Maya, its own power. Again, in prana, all this rests and functions. This Brahman is like a thunderbolt about to strike. It is a great terror. Those who know this Brahman become immortal. From fear of it, Brahman, fire gives heat. Out of terror, the sun shines. Afraid of it, Indra, Vayu, and the fifth death rush to perform their respective duties. If anyone is able to attain the knowledge of Brahman before death, he gets liberation in this very life. Otherwise, he is born again and again in this world and other worlds. Just as a clear reflection is seen in a clear mirror, so also the self is seen in a pure mind. In the world of the ancestors, you see yourself hazily, as you see things in a dream. In the world of the Gandharvas, you see the self as you see a reflection in water, again hazily. But when you see yourself in the world of Brahma, you see it as clearly as you see light and shade. The sense organs have a separate origin in that they are products of the elements. They are active when an individual is awake. They are idle when he is asleep. A truly wise person knows that the self is independent of the sense organs, and he is therefore no longer susceptible to sorrow. The mind is superior to the sense organs. The intellect is superior to the mind. Superior to the intellect is the great self, Hiranyagarbha. Superior to the great self is the unmanifest, Avyakta. The Purusha, the cosmic self or Brahman, is all-pervasive and formless, so there's no way of knowing it. If anyone knows it, he is liberated from the cycle of birth and death and attains immortality, even when he is alive. The cosmic self, Purusha, is not an object of our vision. No one can see it by his eyes or perceive it by any other sense organ. It reveals itself in the heart only when the mind is pure and constantly thinks of it. Having realized it properly, one becomes immortal. When the 5 organs of perception stop working, having merged with the mind, and the intellect too has retired from its work, that is a state scholars describe as being the highest spiritual state. According to the yogins, the state in which all of the organs are at complete rest is yoga. In that state, a yogi never makes a mistake. For instance, he is not attracted by sense pleasures because he is one with the self. But this yogic state may have its fall just as it has its rise. So those were the first 11 verses. Now we come to verse 12. So the self-Brahman is beyond speech and thought. The eyes and other organs cannot perceive it. Yet some people, having been inspired by the scriptures and their teachers, believe that it exists. But how can it be demonstrated to those who do not believe? So Brahman is beyond thought and speech. No sense organ can perceive it. But still some people believe that it exists. They do so under the influence of their teachers and the scriptures they have studied. But what about the non-believers? They may very well reject the theory that Brahman exists, since there is no tangible proof of it. Is there any way of demonstrating the existence of Brahman to such people? He says, no, Brahman is not like an object that can be demonstrated, but that does not mean that it does not exist. Where else did this world come from? It came from Brahman. Brahman is the root of everything that exists. It is the first cause. If there is a tree, it is to be presumed that it came from a seed, whether that seed is visible or not. So something cannot come out of nothing. Only something can produce something else. And if the world is real, it must have come out of something that is real. Unreality cannot produce reality. Brahman is therefore real, whether it is perceptible or not. The phenomenal world may totally disappear, but its support, that is, the consciousness underlying the world, will continue. So Brahman is the source of all consciousness, and thus Brahman will continue. Brahman is the cause, the world is the effect. The effect may disappear, but the cause will continue. The effect will go back to the cause. As it says in the Bible, from dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. So the self, or God, or Brahman, as he said, is something that can't be perceived by the senses. It's something we can't see or hear or feel. It's something that can't even be perceived by the mind. And therefore, it makes it very hard to kind of believe in or have faith in, because it's invisible to us. But yet, we know it's there. If we give some thought, we must realize that somehow this world, as well as ourselves, we must have come out of something. And so there must be something there, even though we can't perceive it. The great difficulty in religion is that we perceive the world. We see the outside world, and for us that world is real. And we have no doubt, yes, this world exists. And it's very concrete. But when we come to religion, we're basically dealing with something that we've never seen, that we haven't experienced, that we don't know exists, and so it's very difficult to appreciate that. And this is one of the problems in religious life, is that in the beginning, this world is very real, and we're willing to work very hard in order to achieve success in the world. We study for years and years in school, we go to a job, we work long hours for everything, because we can see that through this I can have a successful career, I can have a nice home, a nice family, a nice car and everything. And so we can see the benefit of it, and we're willing to go to great sacrifice, to great effort in order to achieve our success. Now, even when a person starts to get into religion, starts to really kind of want to be spiritual, begin to follow the spiritual path, often our efforts are sort of lukewarm, because we're doing it because of a sense of this is what I should be doing, or I know this is the truth, I know this is what life is about and what I should be doing, but we don't have any feel for what we're doing, for what the result is. And so at first it is very difficult. When we can see the results of our actions, then actually we can do intense kind of struggle to achieve those desires. When we have a strong desire, we are willing to go to almost any ends in order to kind of fulfill that desire. But then when we come to religion, it tends to be at first, like I said, a matter of doing our duty, doing what we know we should do, or what we feel we should do, but it doesn't have that drive, that our search for God, it doesn't have the drive that people have, that intense drive that people have for things in the world. But if we could have that drive, have the same importance attached to our search for God as we do for things in the world, we could quickly realize God. You know, Swami Varadananda, he said that students spend so many hours over so many years studying so hard in order to succeed in life. He said if they could work that hard in order to realize God, they could realize Him. It's not that it's impossible. It's not that it's something actually ultimately very difficult to attain, but we don't have kind of the intensity of it. However, some people get the conviction about God through scriptures, through study of scriptures, or through contact with a teacher, particularly an illumined teacher, can give a conviction that yes, there is something there. And also, as we begin to practice, as we begin to search for God and seek God, gradually experiences begin to come. Some little taste of it, some little touch, something suddenly shifts in consciousness, and we experience something new and different. And we start to feel kind of the benefits. Those people who have been meditating for some time will generally find that what they're getting out of the meditation, the kind of the peace, the calmness, the sense of just being, in a happier state of mind, is gradually bringing benefits and gradually making the person want to do it. And this is one of the great plateaus in kind of spiritual life, a spiritual journey, is when you want to do it, when you really feel the need to do it, you really enjoy it, it really makes you happy, and it's becoming more and more an important part of your life. So all of this universe is there. The self, what they call the self, is there within us. The presence of God is there within us, and it's a matter of bringing the awareness of that self, of that spiritual presence of God, into our actual consciousness, into our actual experience. And this is what the essence of Vedanta is, and the teachings of the Upanishads, is that this ultimate reality, this Brahman, this God, is something that can actually be experienced by each and every person, because it's ultimately, it's who we are, it's what we are, and in order to be effective, in order to be, for religion to be really effective, it's not a matter of following rules or behaving and following ethics and so on, but ultimately it becomes a matter of connecting with God. Now, when you read about Brahman and about this ultimate reality, that's kind of the ultimate goal. But on the way to that goal, as you're moving towards it, gradually some of the light begins to come. Some sense of yes, there is something there. And with that comes a deeper conviction that slowly draws the person more and more. And it's strange that even though God is closer to us than anything in the universe, it can seem so difficult to get in touch with. And so this is where kind of the spiritual practice and things like that ultimately come into play, is removing the kind of obstacles that prevent us from realizing God. So verse 13 then, it says that first and foremost, one has to have the realization that the cosmic self, the Paramatman, exists. Next, one must try to realize the true nature of that self. Between the two categories of people, in other words, those who have the conviction that the cosmic self exists and those who lack that conviction, the chances are that the self will reveal itself to the former. So first, one must intellectually have the conviction that the cosmic self exists. But this is only the beginning. One has to go much further. After this conviction, one has to intensify one's spiritual efforts so that the self finally reveals itself. The revelation comes as an experience, direct and impersonal, and it takes place independent of the sense organs. With this experience, one realizes the true nature of the cosmic self, that the cosmic self is attributeless. So first of all, as you know, we remember in Jnana Yoga, in the path of knowledge, the three basic elements. In the path of knowledge are Shravana, hearing the truth, Manana, thinking about the truth, and finally Nitijasana, realizing the truth. So first, you have to have some awareness that there is this higher reality there. You can get that through scriptures or through a teacher, but somehow you have to hear about that reality. And I mentioned, my own experience was that, as most of you know, that I got into Vedanta back when I was in the army. I was in Germany. In our army base, it had a little PX, a little bookstore in it, and I came across a copy of the book How to Know God by Swami Varadananda, the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali. And when I read that book, it seemed like this is something I'd always known, but yet I'd never thought of it. I never thought it because it needed a trigger. It was deep within us. We have the knowledge that God is there, that we're spirit, that the spiritual knowledge is there, but it takes something to kind of bring it to the surface so that we become aware of it. It takes some kind of a trigger. In the same way, Shravana, somehow somebody usually has to tell us about the truth. Only those who have kind of become spiritually advanced in previous lives come with an inner conviction about the reality of God. But if we don't ever hear about these ideas, then it just generally won't occur to us. And we'll just live totally at the material plane without thinking. And this is what many people do, without ever thinking that there's any kind of higher reality or anything higher than this world. So Shravana, you have to first somehow come in contact with the truth. Secondly comes Manana. This is called thinking deeply about the truth. And this is something that, particularly in the West, I don't know about India, but in the West, it's something we rarely do. I mentioned before how all my years going through school, going through college and all, I never spent a single afternoon thinking about chemistry or history or anything. You read the book, you take the test, and you go on. But actually thinking about it, thinking deeply, trying to understand it, is something we rarely do. There was a scandal at IIT a few years ago where they had the guy was doing his orals. He was for his master's degree in electrical engineering. And they were asking him, all the technical questions, and he was giving it all back, all the formulas and things. And then they began to ask him some very basic questions about electricity. Like, suppose you have an electrical field and you put a piece of wood in it, what happens? Well, what they discovered is that this person, he knew all the technical stuff, but he had no idea what electricity is or how it works. The worst driver I've ever been, the most life-threatening driver I've ever been with in my life was an automotive engineer. He worked designing cars, but he had no idea how to drive one. So like that, it's only when you think about something, and this deep thinking, this is when the understanding comes, the grasp of it, the feel for it. And this is when you think deeply about something, not only do you begin to get insights, and we find that if we have a particular subject or a particular book that we go back to again and again, each time we tend to get a new kind of insight into it. And we find that more and more it tends to come up into our consciousness. And also after some time, we find that this knowledge that we're studying, it's become like a part of us. It's like a friend. It's like a part of our nature as we do these thoughts. Once Swami Varadananda, and some of you know him, he was the Swami from South Africa who stayed with us back in the 70s for some time. Once he remarked about Swami Varadananda. He said that people look at Swami Varadananda and they think they see a man. But actually, Swami Varadananda is scriptures. All the scriptures are there, and that's the whole essence, the whole inner nature is all scriptures. And so, like that, it's the state of our consciousness that determines the state of our whole experience and determines essentially what we are. A person can have a very nice, beautiful looking body and be a really bad person inside, be very, very kind of negative. Another person, you look at he may be ugly or ill-dressed or something, and yet be a wonderful being inside. It's not kind of how we appear, it's not our physical success, or anything. It's kind of what the state of our consciousness is. And that consciousness has the capacity to go all the way to the deepest levels of hell, to the deepest levels of darkness and ignorance, all the way up to the divine. And it's primarily what we put into our consciousness that determines that. And so by taking spiritual books or by using the mantra, some spiritual practice or something, or a devotional practice, gradually we're putting in good things into the mind. Gradually the mind becomes filled with that, and that becomes our nature. And we get the benefit of it, and other people do too. Everything we do and everything we think, it creates a samskara, an impression on the mind. The state of our consciousness right now is the sum total of all the samskaras, the impressions we've kind of put in up to this point. Now, and normally, this is totally unconscious. We just, whatever thoughts come, they just come. Whatever kind of desires come, they just come, and we don't, we just kind of go with the flow. We don't really pay attention to it, and it just kind of develops. But when a person begins to consciously put in a particular line of thought, or a particular spiritual practice, or devotional practice, when you begin to consciously put it, you're beginning to put in, you're taking control of the process, and you're beginning to put in good samskaras, good impressions, and you have the capacity to totally create, totally remake who you are and what you are, so that you can go from a very kind of miserable level of darkness, you can gradually raise yourself and become filled with spiritual. And after some time, that becomes your natural state. At first, any kind of spiritual practice, it tends to be a struggle. You're trying to put in a good impressions, and all the old impressions are kind of battling, are kind of getting in the way and kind of resisting it. And so there's a difficulty, a struggle goes on. But in time, as you put in more and more of the good thoughts, your consciousness, your mind, your subconscious gradually becomes filled with that, and that then becomes natural to you. That becomes your nature. You don't have to struggle and with things anymore. It just becomes natural. And eventually, ultimately, if you attain realization, actual experience of spirit, then there's no struggle at all, because there's two levels here. One is the level of spiritual practice. One where we meditate, we do japa, we study scriptures and things like that, and gradually we fill our minds and so forth up with good impressions, and we become better and better people. And we get more and more light kind of coming into our experience. But that's different than realization. Realization, knowledge of the self, knowledge of the Brahman, the actual spiritual consciousness, this doesn't depend on the state of our mind. It doesn't depend on whether we're good or whether we're bad or anything else. right now we're all asleep and we're having this dream of a life. And we're experiencing this life and we're in this dream. And so in this dream, sometimes we're getting better, sometimes we're getting worse. Sometimes we're experiencing good things, sometimes we're experiencing bad things. But realization means that you wake up from the dream. And now you realize, oh, that was a dream. I'm here. I'm always perfect. I'm always Brahman. I'm always the child of God. I'm always with God. God is always with me. And the human life, the human mind, everything, it disappears like a dream. When you wake up in the morning, you may be having a dream. It may be a very pleasant dream, or it may be a horrible nightmare. No matter what the dream is, as soon as you wake up, well, it's gone. And you go, oh, that was just a dream, an imagination. It wasn't actually real. And all your problems are over. And you realize, oh, eternally, for all eternity, I'm with God, God's with me. So right now, we're in the dream, and as we practice, start to put in good thoughts and so forth, gradually we're getting a better and better dream will begin to come. But then a point comes when we wake up from the dream. And this is what they mean by realization. That suddenly you're no longer the human being, or you're now in a completely different state of consciousness, of reality. And so this is kind of what we're doing. The practice that we're doing is necessary and important. Theoretically, yes, you can wake up in an instant. And this thing is, spiritual practice, spiritual development is a gradual process. Gradually you're kind of getting better and better. Slowly, more and more is unfolding. Whereas on the other hand, realization comes in an instant. You either have it or you don't. You're either awake or you're asleep. When you're awake, you have everything. It's not like you get a little bit of Brahman, a little bit of Brahman, but it's everything. It all is there because that's the consciousness. However, within our ordinary experience and with our ordinary kind of what we're capable of now, then you have the process of gradually kind of developing. And this basically, even though theoretically Brahman is there, it's always there, it's the reality, theoretically we can wake up any moment in practice. It usually takes quite a bit of work before a person can attain that realization. It's like we used before, we used the example of the mirror. How normally what we experience through the mind and through the buddhi, through the intellect. And that's how we get our knowledge, our awareness of things, and so forth. And we mentioned before, the mind buddhi is like a mirror. And if a mirror is completely covered with dirt, you don't see anything at all in it. And so by spiritual practices and good life and things like that, you're gradually kind of cleaning the mirror so that gradually you begin to see some light in it. You begin to see something there. And more, as you clean it, you get a clearer and clearer reflection of what's actually there. However, as you get a clearer reflection, a clearer awareness of what's there, there comes a point where there's a shift in consciousness. And you realize, oh, I'm not the reflection in the mirror, I'm the witness. I'm the consciousness here, which is aware of it, and this is when the enlightenment comes. By shining your mirror, by cleaning the mirror, you're getting better and better, more and more light is coming into your life. Better and better experiences are beginning to come to you. But at a certain point, there will come the realization that, oh, that's not me, that's the me is here. The me is this consciousness which is being reflected in the mirror. They say everything, every being, every individual in this universe has been described as like a pot of water. You have a pot of water, some little tiny pots, some great big pots, but in every pot of water the sun is reflected. And in a big pot, it'll be a bigger reflection. In a small pot, it'll be smaller reflection. But the nature of the reflection has no effect at all on the sun. The nature of the reflection in the mirror has no effect at all on the sun. If you're a really bad person, if you're a very, very kind of negative person, it doesn't have any effect on your real nature, because that's just being kind of reflected. So our spiritual work and practice is kind of cleaning our mirror, cleaning our consciousness, but eventually comes a point when we discover, oh, I'm not that reflection there, I'm here. And this is the basic principle behind Jnana Yoga. Behind it is that you are the witness. You are just consciousness, awareness, being aware. Right now, you're aware of this room. You're aware of what you're experiencing right here, and but you're not in the room. You're not actually here. You're not actually here in the body or anything. You're actually the consciousness, the awareness that is just like the spectator, just seeing what's there. And so all of this, as we think in these terms, 99% of the time, the world is putting in the idea that your body is real, your physical experience, this is what's real, this is the real world. And slowly you have to begin to put in other thoughts, think on these things, and slowly then the enlightenment or the awareness of the divinity will gradually begin to come. But I say it's very difficult because we don't see the reality. We don't see Brahman, we don't see, and we can't see Brahman, but it takes time to build up that faith, that conviction that yes, it's really there, and then at some point comes the realization. And this is what is meant by spirituality. By spiritual life is to have the actual realization, the actual experience of that reality. And then once you attain that, as Swami Varadananda said, once you attain the awareness that I'm this pure spiritual consciousness, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm this pure spiritual consciousness, then you discover that the consciousness, which is aware of you, which is kind of observing your life and your experience, so that same consciousness is within every other being. And this is the ultimate goal or state in Vedanta, is to discover that rather than being a separate individual, cut off from everybody else, separate from everything else, you're actually one with everything. You won't experience that at the physical level. At the physical level, you look out, you see different bodies, this body, that body, and they're all different. And you see different minds. No two people have the same personality, and generally no person understands actually the mind of another. Basically, what we see another person, and based on their behavior and on our own kind of nature, we project and say, "Oh, this person is this way." If he knew, or she knew what we thought about them, they say, "Oh no, I'm not like that at all. You don't know me at all." But because we don't know anybody, because we were cut off. But as we begin our inner search, our inner approach, eventually you're moving into the oneness of things, the one consciousness within everything, and then you begin to realize that this artificial separation of this is myself, this is yourself, and so on, that begins to be replaced by a sense of being in harmony with all things, in oneness with all things. As long as there's duality, as long as there's a me and you, invariably there's going to be some kind of conflict. Because one ego is trying to express itself, and the other ego is trying to express itself, and invariably it leads to some friction, some conflict. But when you get back into the unity, into oneness, then there's only the one self. You're no longer operating from an ego, from the sense that this is me and that's you. You're now operating from a standpoint of the one consciousness, and everything then becomes an expression of the harmony of that oneness. And wonderful things then begin to happen as you begin to take that approach. Your whole experience gradually begins to change, become transformed. So that whereas you start out with the world like a battlefield, where you're struggling in life and going through all kinds of conflicts and battles with other people and situations and so forth, you now begin to see the underlying divinity that's there. You begin to become aware of the underlying divinity that's there in all people, in all, because we're all expressions of that oneself, and you begin to just become aware of it. It's like normally, in every situation, our standpoint is, this is me, and I'm in this situation. How do I do it? How do I make people like me? How do I, accomplish what I want to do? What's going? We view every experience that comes to us from an ego standpoint of what's it doing to me. Am I enjoying this experience, or am I not enjoying this experience? And so forth. And everything is seen from a personal standpoint. Now, as a person begins to develop and grow, you move more into an impersonal standpoint where you're not operating so much as the ego, as the individual, kind of struggling, trying to get things in the world, but you're operating from the standpoint of the one self, of the divine self within, and as you realize it within yourself, you also begin to see, oh, this is what the world is. Instead of seeing a lot of objects and saying, I like that object, I want to grab it, I don't like that object, I want to push it away, instead of that, you start to just see the true beauty, the true wonder and magic that's there even in this world. As an individual, as an ego, we have constant problems, constant stress, constant struggle, because we're kind of being buffeted by the world. But as we go deeper into our real self, then you see everything becomes relaxed. It's like Sri Ramakrishna said that the person who enjoys the painting, for example, is not the manager of the gallery, because he's worried, who's going to buy the painting? How much money am I going to get? And the artist, he's worried because, are people going to like my painting? Will I become famous like Picasso or so forth? And so he's worried about it. The person who actually enjoys, who can truly appreciate the beauty of the painting, is the spectator. The person who just is looking at the painting, says, oh, a beautiful painting. He doesn't want to buy it. He doesn't want to do anything with it. He's got no kind of commitment to it. He looks and says, oh, this is beautiful. That's consciousness gradually develops as we let go more and more of our ego kind of approach to life and just relax back into this witnessing attitude that develops as we develop a sense of surrender. And this is one of the Swami Varadananda, who wrote the Sri Ramakrishna, the great master. He said, this is the final stage in spiritual life, is surrender. When you realize that it's actually God who's running the universe, he doesn't need my help. He doesn't need anything. I don't have to do anything. I just, once I'm aware of the presence of God within me, it begins to do everything. And this is what, when you read like the realized souls or the Jnani Advaita, like Nisargadatta people, one of their coming is, you're not the doer. Doing the actions, the talking and walking and doing things that takes place, is just happening. You're not the doer, and the more you pull out of doing things with your emotions and attitudes and worries and all these things, the more you pull that out of action, the more spontaneous, the more kind of worry-free and stressful, less stressful activity becomes, until you begin to reach a point where life is just flowing. You all just naturally do what you do, and it just, when the time comes, you say the right thing, you do the right thing, you don't worry. What am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about that? You realize that everything is in good hands. We think, as an ego, we think, oh, the world depends on me. My life, my success, everything depends on me, on my efforts, on my ability, my intelligence, and so forth. When we become religious, we also say, oh, I've got to do good to the world. I've got to save people. I've got to do bad. That's a stage. Do good and be good. This is a kind of, as you say, the first stage, a real kind of religion. But after, when you go deeper, you realize that actually you don't have to do anything. God's running the whole universe. He can run your life too. You know, if you just kind of relax and let Him operate. And so there's this transition that takes place between being in a very personal, very individual, very kind of stressful struggle with life, and being a part of life and just watching things kind of unfold. So then verse 14 says that when a person has all his heart's desires destroyed, he attains immortality and becomes one with Brahman in this very life. So the Katha Upanishad again and again says that the goal of life is to attain immortality. But how can one attain it? There are some obstacles in the path, and these obstacles are desires. A person is pushed around by his desires, and he has to get rid of them. When these desires are gone, the self reveals itself automatically. It is like removing dirt from a mirror. When the dirt is gone, the mirror clearly reflects your face. In the same way, when your desires are gone and you recognize your true identity, you recognize that you are the self. By this recognition, you know that you are immortal and that you are none other than Brahman. You have this experience in this very life. It is a matter of discrimination and renunciation. By discrimination, you decide what is good for you and what is bad, and you renounce the bad. Then the mind becomes pure, and when this happens, the self automatically reveals itself. So when a person has all his heart's desires destroyed, he attains immortality and becomes one with Brahman in this very life. So as we see, in the teachings of Ramakrishna, how he emphasized, renunciation and the kind of getting rid of desires, because desires are the main stumbling block to realization. I remember one of the first things Swami Varadananda said, he said, our mother shows us pictures and we try to grab them. And this is what gets us in trouble. This is what gets us into ignorance, is that we see things and we try to grab them. And in the process of grabbing them, we lose the awareness of who we actually are. And we grab hold of the idea that, okay, I'm a body. And then we spend our time, getting the body in shape, working it, and so forth, and we forget, I'm immortal spirit. And so, like that, what we grab hold of with consciousness, this is what we become. We mentioned before in our meditation class how Swami Vivekananda said, that we all exist as three beings simultaneously. We exist as a physical being, a physical body, we exist as a mind, and we exist as Atman, a spirit. All three of these are with us every moment. All three are there, but what we become in actual, in our experience, depends on where we attach our attention. If we have strong desires for the world, then that's where our attention is, and our consciousness then becomes a worldly consciousness. It becomes kind of confined within the world, and that's all we know. And so in the spiritual life, you're trying to kind of reverse the direction of things, so that instead of always seeking your happiness, your satisfaction, instead of seeking it outside, by getting a good relationship or more money or more position or this or that, instead of seeking satisfaction outside, we began to look for it within. And that's when you start to gradually unfold the presence of divinity within. And it's this presence then where you find your true satisfaction. Now, desire is fundamentally an obstacle to spiritual life, because first of all, desire says, I'm lacking something. And so I reach out and I try to grab it. I try to grab it from another person or something else, and so forth. Now, as spirit, you don't lack anything. As self, as Atman, as spirit, you don't lack anything. And when they talk about renunciation and so forth, it's not a negative thing, as it seems to be. What it's saying is that instead of kind of losing that which is important, it's based on the idea that when you get things back into proper shape, you'll be completely happy. You'll be completely satisfied, and all your desires will go because you don't need them anymore. A millionaire doesn't care about a dime on the pavement, although they probably do, because millionaires are usually pretty greedy. But it really is not. Once you find, in other words, once you find the true satisfaction, the true happiness, and things that you've been seeking, then if you don't need fame, you don't need to be president of a corporation or anything, it doesn't matter anymore. Not because it's a hatred of the world or a hatred of things, but just because you found something that you realize that all these other things are unimportant. It's like when you're a child, you had your favorite toy, and if that toy got broken, you would cry and you'd be terribly upset. But when you're an adult, you may look at your old toys and say, okay, that's nice, but it's not a struggle. You don't have to overcome the temptation to go play with your doll anymore. You've outgrown that. And so like that, comes a point, in the early stages, there tends to be a lot of struggle, because we're still being drawn towards various desires. But as you begin to go deeper, then those desires, they just kind of wilt away. They go away because you realize, I don't need it. As a matter of fact, the things that people seek in the world, like success and everything, those things become a nuisance when a person starts to become a little spiritual. This is why people often they withdraw from the world for some time, because once they get that inner taste of things, then they begin to go within, and then getting overly involved in external activities, it becomes a distraction, something that's always kind of pulling them away from what's really important to them. And so this idea of being free from desire, although it involves a lot of struggle, in the beginning, the desires seem very big. And like our emotions, our feelings, our anger, all these things, fear, all these things, they seem very big at first because we've been grabbing hold of them, holding on to them. When you begin to detach from them, then they may still be there, but they don't matter anymore. And this is kind of the first step, is that it's fine to enjoy the things of the world, that's fine. But you don't depend upon them. You don't need them. If something nice happens, if somebody gives you a good meal, you say fine and you enjoy it, but you don't miss it if it's not there. This is my experience with TV. We haven't had TV for years, but I found if a TV is there, my tendency is just sit and watch it for hours on end. But if it's not there, I don't even notice it. I don't miss it at all. And so, like that, you'll find that, okay, a situation there, pleasurable situation, fine, you can enjoy it, but if it's not there, you don't miss it. It doesn't bother you. And so, this is kind of a first stage. The deeper stage comes when no matter what you're experiencing, you're always in touch with this inner thing that's developed. And you're really, the substance of your life is really becoming this inner unfoldment of divinity from within, and then you just, the experiences come and you say fine, whatever. And so you experience more of an unfolding of life, of scenes, rather than trying to make things happen. Now, when there's desire, we're constantly trying to make things happen. And we're constantly getting frustrated because it's not working out the way we want. And this is, in the Gita, there's a verse that out of desire comes anger. Because when we don't get the desire, we become angry. And we begin frustrated and upset. And so when the desire isn't there, then you attain what's called equilibrium, which is yoga is equilibrium. You get your balance back. And you become, first of all, you become stable in yourself, at peace with yourself, and at peace with the world. And you realize more and more that you don't need anything at all from anybody else, from any other thing in the world. You don't need anything. And then, instead of approaching people and situations, and so for the idea of trying to grab something out of it, trying to get something out of it, you now just relax and let it happen, and you start to become more and more just a kind of a giver. You're just happy. Okay, whatever happened. When we get back into our true state, we tend to become kind of good and loving, just naturally. All the fears and all the other obstacles that are there, gradually they start to fade away, and we just kind of become naturally kind of like a light shining in the world that helps to uplift everybody. So, so we're getting now very close to the end of the Katha Upanishad. We may, in fact, finish it possibly next week or so, next week or two. So as long as there's a desire, they say, and this is the other thing, is that the desires, they say, these are the source of continual birth and rebirth. We have a desire. We want to do something, and we can't express it in this life. So then the soul, because of desire, it takes on another birth. It says, oh, let me try this life over here. Because that desire is there, and this is what keeps the soul kind of going on samsara. Birth after birth after birth. So as long as the desires are there, then the soul will take a birth so that it can fulfill that desire. But when finally you transcend all the desires, then you remain as you are, which is Brahman, which is not a little body enjoying certain things, but it's Brahman, and that becomes your real self. And that becomes kind of then, there's no longer the need to come back. There's no longer the compulsion to come back. Souls who have attained Brahman, what Ramakrishna called Jivakotis, they attain their union with God and they forget the universe and just stay there. Other souls, which Ramakrishna called Ishvarakotis, even though they've attained liberation, even though they don't have to come back to the world, often they'll come back in order to help other people, to be teachers and so forth. So any questions there? So actually we're almost, a couple more weeks I think we'll be done with Katha Upanishad. Okay. So thank you. We all had, I think we were had a very wonderful week last week with the Chicago calling. We had over 50 monks and nuns here and devotees from around the world, and the whole program was very successful, and now it's actually quiet again. So now this week, let me think. Tomorrow, Saturday, I think they're trying to get together some kind of program for the volunteers, but I don't know what time or where, or have they?
It starts only at 10:30.
10:30?
And it's in downtown.
Where?
Manish lives. Where Manish lives, in downtown.
Yeah.
At 10:30.
But where at?
I don't know the exact address.
But whose place?
Close to Manish's house.
Oh, Manish Agrawal. Okay, near his house. Okay. But anyway, I don't know. It's kind of vague, so I don't know if people are sure. By the way, it's for the volunteers, all those who help, and all those who dance too are welcome. Anyway, So that's coming up. And then in the evening, I'll be going to Parliament of Religions. They're having their celebration of the 120th anniversary of the Parliament of Religions. So I'll be going to their program. And that starts at 4, and then there's a dinner afterwards. And then Sunday, I think Swami Varadananda, he will give the talk. And I guess is it next week that Swami Shantarupananda, he's going to do a retreat here in Homerglen from the, I think, 22nd to the 24th. And so, that's it. So things are kind of back to normal now. Okay. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurmam Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, you lead us from the unreal to the real. You lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Om peace, peace,